The priority of Mark's Gospel among the Synoptics remains a bedrock for many theorists, but many arguments in favor of Marcan priority have either been long refuted or else should be discarded. Let's look at three particular examples. Mark's relatively bad writing style is a popular argument for Marcan priority, but it's based on a rather silly proposition that Mark would not have messed up Matthew's or Luke's good grammar had one of them come first. Of course, under my thesis, this is irrelevant since I believe Mark was an independent product based on an oral core of material used by the apostles. But we can further add that bad writing, from a literary perspective, is not a reason to suppose priority, and if anything, it's good reason to suppose a later writing, since it's usually the case that better forms of a work are issued first. In reality, Mark's choppy style fits well by seeing Mark's Gospel as a record of the preaching of Peter. We can note this extended evaluation by two scholarly theorists. A second argument appeals to the supposed primitive Christology of Mark, but this argument fails on a few grounds. First, if we wish to argue this, all of the Synoptic Gospels contain a primitive Christology compared to Paul's letters, which the theorists all agree were earlier than Mark. Second, Mark's Christology is far from primitive. We see in Mark a number of examples of an advanced Christology. A final point is that if Mark is a record of Peter's preaching, well, not to denigrate Peter, but we're not exactly dealing with a top theologian. Mark could have been drawn from Matthew or Luke just as easily as Billy Graham could borrow from R.C. Sproul. Sorry, Peter. The argument from order is often considered the most powerful argument in the Marcan priority arsenal. It is argued that there is no plausible reason why Mark should have broken up Matthew's order, but there are plausible reasons why Matthew should have broken up Mark's. The irony in this for me is that whatever reason theorists may give for Matthew breaking up Mark, it can just as plausibly be attributed to Matthew for breaking up his own Aramaic version if it was originally in an order that is what we see in Mark now. But more generally, one may construct reasonable hypotheses for any shift in order from one evangelist to another, and more often than not, arguments from order beg the question of the theory being proposed. I've noticed in this regard that more often than not, theorists take Marcan priority for granted rather than arguing it. There's one particular project from my studies that stands out. In the 1970s, a group of secular and classical scholars looked closely at the Q and Marcan priority literary hypotheses, and declared them inferior to other hypotheses. The fact that they had no dog in the hunt when they said this should give all of us pause. In our next segment, we'll discuss more broadly a chief argument behind views of Q and Marcan priority, the idea that they offer the best explanation for parallels between the documents as we now have them. See you then.